Let's step into a time machine and go all the way back to 2004. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie is coming out, and you feel like playing some games based on one of your favorite Nickelodeon cartoons. Sure, we have the console games like the movie and Battle for Bikini Bottom, but let's dive a little deeper. We have the AWE PC games, some of my personal favorites, but let's keep looking. How about this? This was a lot of fun. But nah, if you're looking for something free and accessible as long as you have internet connection, there's no better place to look than Nick.com. By this point in time, the SpongeBob Flash games that were kicked off by Smashing Ideas in 1999 were beginning to come out more frequently. Sarbakan shook things up with SpongeBob's Pizza Toss in 2003, a SpongeBob version of Paperboy that became really popular. It spawned a few different versions, including one that was part of Nickelodeon's Nick Arcade lineup. The Nick Arcade was also home to an abundance of 3D platformers, including Obstacle Odyssey and the 3D Groove ones. But going into 2004, amidst the many games made to help advertise the movie, Sarbakan put out its next big hit with BC Bowling. And before we move on, if you're new here, hi, I'm Lucy. Lately we've been recapping the history of SpongeBob Flash games on this channel. If you're interested in hearing about the ones that came before the movie, check out these videos. Thank you so much. So BC Bowling was made in honor of an episode that aired that year. I'm sure many of us fondly remember UGG, or SpongeBob SquarePants BC as it was advertised as. So let's see what SpongeGar and Patar are up to this time. As can be expected, it's bowling in the theme of UGG. Now I have a lot of nostalgia for the concept of bowling, but not because I used to partake in it. Actually, I would always get the lowest score whenever I'd go bowling with people. But in the 2000s, there were so many popular bowling games that were easily playable on a Windows computer. Most notably Hyper Bowl and Polar Bowler. Collectively, I've probably put more hours into bowling games than any other sports game. But let's get on with this one. If you ask me, the music sounds very George of the Jungle. SpongeGar likes to smash stuff, so you're bowling across a slime trail left by his gigantic pet snail. You click to throw the ball in one quick motion and guide it with the arrow keys, so even if your initial shot is bad, you can make an attempt to recover. You try to get a high score, because if you miss, SpongeGar bawls his eyes out. I can relate. I also break into tears whenever I try to bowl. Though I'm not sure why he has to shake his butt all the time. He just has to make a big scene out of it. There are also power-ups you can roll over to improve your chances at getting a high score. Jellyfish and starfish give you more points, while the chisel turns your ball into a log and the fire burns it, which gives you a chance for an easy strike. I'd say there are just enough power-ups to keep the game interesting, but not too many to the point where they overload it. You can still keep your bowling methods fairly traditional. And I just gotta say, I love all the details that were put into this. Every little aspect is prehistoric themed, or otherwise really cartoony. There's a lot going down on the screen. The energy is kept up as you go. Patar chisels into this rock to keep track of your pins, then he eats the hammer. This flower shoots balls for you, and this tentacle places the pins. This is a very lively bowling game, and one that's really fun to play. It's great. But actually, just like with Pizza Toss, this received an alternate version that was made for the Nick Arcade. Now there's a 2-player mode with an ability to enter your name. Not only that, but you can play as Squog. He has some really interesting animations. Other than that, it isn't too different, but the 2-player mode is good to have. So let's move on to the next game. Now we're going into 2005, and the Nick Arcade is flourishing with the release of Krabby Quest. This was made by Midnight Synergy and used the same source code as their game Wonderland. It was a rather difficult puzzle game where you had to move SpongeBob and Patrick through a series of mazes and do everything in an extremely specific order. You had to push crates, fight enemies, lure jellyfish to certain places, and press switches at the right time. It was very, very hard. I have another video where I explore the game in depth, but bear in mind, it's an older work of mine, and I like to think I've gotten a lot better at YouTubing since I made it. I mean, right away I say Obstacle Odyssey came out in 2002 instead of 2004, but I don't think the Anti-Lucy Club will take me to court over that one. And while this was a reskin of Wonderland, it had its own merits too, and that special SpongeBob energy, but it's still extremely difficult. You can skip some of the harder stages for an in-game cost. Still, this is a good game for people who really want to challenge themselves. But 2005 gave us another challenging game that would eventually evolve into something great. This is where This Is Pop entered the scene. They would go on to make a lot of smaller SpongeBob Flash games, but they really started big when they first tried their hand at it. Just don't ask about some of their other Flash games. Seriously, they made some really weird stuff outside of SpongeBob. But this is Square Off, which is interesting because it was never released on Nick.com. It was only available on the This Is Pop website. But if it looks familiar to you, that's because it's a much smaller version of what would later become Atlantis SquarePants Square Off. It's essentially a SpongeBob version of Fire Emblem, but with cards. You move SpongeBob across a board and select cards to fight enemies or defend yourself with. You move throughout Bikini Bottom and try to reach the end of a map to fight a boss. You gather more cards that use up different levels of energy and deal certain levels of damage. You have to choose carefully because you lose the card after you use it, so there's a lot of going back and replaying to collect as many different cards as you can. The Atlantis SquarePants version is heavily expanded on and even contains cutscenes along with other features. This is really good, but I'd recommend the Atlantis SquarePants version for the full experience. But let's focus on one we haven't looked at before, on a very interesting program at that. I believe the time has come to talk about 3D VIA. 3D VIA Virtuals was a platform people could use to create all sorts of games and other digital projects. Countless works were made with it, but most of them have been lost to time. 3D VIA is mostly forgotten too, and it's hard to find information on it when you try to look it up. Just a really old website that showcases a lot of what they have. But Sarbakan used the 3D VIA Virtual Software Suite to develop a SpongeBob game in 2005. I guess they decided to follow their bowling game with a golfing one, just like Polar Bowler. So this is Shrink and Sink Golf. Now the character models in this are strange. Especially Patrick when he does his little dance. So you choose to play as either SpongeBob or Patrick, then you get a storyline to kick off your golfing adventure. Plankton here creates the Z234G Metamicroplasmic Shrinktron 9000, which he uses to shrink SpongeBob and Patrick. So just like anyone else who just got shrunk, they decide to play golf. Well, it makes total sense to me. What else are you gonna do? So now you're quite literally playing mini golf. Though this game takes advantage of your size by putting you in some very unique environments. The first few stages are in SpongeBob's house and the Krusty Krab. It's fun to see how big everything is in those. As a shorter than average person, this is just what golf normally looks like for me. You have 3 clubs you can switch between. The Coral 3 Wood Club is for long shots, the Shell 9 Iron Club is for high shots, and the Fishbone Putter is for short-range rolling. I also made the mistake of looking too closely at the Coral 3 Wood Club. I don't like the look of that very much. But the animation is interesting. I like the idle movements the characters do and the dances they perform when they win. I feel like this is tough to get the hang of when you first start out, but once you get a feel for the controls, it's a lot easier. You look around by moving the mouse, but you can also see the entire map from above if you press spacebar. You click to swing wherever you're facing, then you click again when a meter is exactly where you want it to be. Then you click again for a second meter to determine your accuracy on the determined range. It's a complicated system that takes some getting used to. It's a lot like Backyard Smash Ball, actually. There are also jellyfish you can hit, and one of 3 things will happen if you do. Either you'll get extra points, you'll be warped somewhere else on the map, or your ball will just explode. Only way to find out what they do is by collecting them. Once you reach the hole, you'll find the other character waiting for you. Hey Patrick, what are you doing up there? You can even hit them with the ball for a funny little animation. But like with any golfing game, it's hard to sink the ball if you aren't fully used to the controls. Before I got the hang of things, it took me nearly 150 strokes to land this shot. Thankfully, all that matters is that you get it in, regardless of how long it takes. But you really have to know when to use which club. You'll use the high one the least, but it's handy for getting the ball over steep inclines. You mostly use the one for long shots, then the short range one when you get close to the hole. But it's very easy to overshoot that final stroke. A lot of the holes are on elevated ground, so you might have to keep hitting the ball back and forth to try and get it to go back up. Sometimes it can take a really long time. Maybe it's a breeze for golf experts, but I don't happen to be one of them. Heck, I used to struggle with Mario Golf. But it's a lot of fun to shoot your ball through each SpongeBob-themed environment and see how you can make everything work. I especially like the Krusty Krab where you can shoot it across different tables. It's also fun to shoot it into the deep fryer. But after the Krusty Krab, it's on to the Chum Bucket. One of the most challenging stages is one where you have to shoot the ball through 2 big barriers, but once it's through, it's pretty easy. But here's the kicker. Once you complete the Chum Bucket, you find Plankton's Shrink Ray, but it's missing batteries. This commences the second half of the game. Now you replay every stage, but on the opposite side of the maps. Now that's an amusing twist. Actually, I found it a bit easier than the first time around. Then you get a really simple final stage and turn yourself back to normal. For the ending, you get to see Plankton saying this is the nadir of his existence. That's an interesting word choice if I do say so myself. I had to look that one up. But anyway, this is a very unique golfing game. The environments are creative, and the idea of being tiny and trying to make golf work is a really neat one. It can be really hard sometimes, but it also has leverage by only really requiring you to sink the ball to move on. You don't have to be a golf expert to experience this game to its fullest. Sometimes you just want to throw it around the Krusty Krab. It's worth giving it a try. Or you could try Polar Golfer, that one's really good too. But now let's move into the year 2006. This year saw the release of the SpongeBob special Dunces and Dragons. To advertise its release, Sarbachan released a Flash game by the same name a month before it. It's based on the game Joust, and you can play as SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, or Sandy in their medieval forms. And yes, specifically Squidward rather than his ancestor Squidly. You then fly around and battle evil knights on seahorseback. It's also two-player if you want to fight alongside someone else. Each enemy is worth a certain amount of points, so you slay them to rack up a high score. There's also an evil dragon jellyfish that you can kill easily if you play as Sandy. Every character has their own special move along with their own strengths and weaknesses. Some can withstand certain obstacles while taking damage to others. And after every section of knight slaying, they duke it out in the arena for a bonus stage. This game is a lot of fun and is widely considered one of the most popular SpongeBob Flash games, but some enemies in later stages can get really tough to kill. Still, it's a welcome challenge. Meanwhile, the Nick Arcade was continuing to flourish with Bubble Rush, a SpongeBob version of the game Zuma Deluxe and Luxor. It's a long game where you have to throw bubbles at matching ones as they move through a chute before they reach Plankton. You collect credits to buy power-ups, and yeah, it's pretty good. It does get a lot harder as you go, though. Like I said, there are a lot of stages. Another game based on a beloved classic is Deep Sea Smash Out, which is a SpongeBob version of Breakout. Yeah, Breakout, Smash Out, it works. But in this, you have to get out of a coral reef by bouncing Gary off your head to smash through coral. And see this little sea urchin thing that can join Gary if you hit it? You might remember it from Pizza Toss. Don't you love the fact that the Sarbachan universe has recurring characters? And I really like the animation of Patrick hitting the screen whenever you click on something. But I also have to mention something else here. 2006 was the year we saw a rather interesting attribute that would stick with SpongeBob Flash games for a long time. Listen to the sound SpongeBob makes in this.
Wow! Yay!
That isn't exactly his normal voice. These were used in a lot of Flash games, and not only ones that were made by Sarbachan. I assume they were part of some library they could use to avoid copyright or something like that, but that's just a guess. You could also hear them in Bikini Bottom Bust Up, the second SpongeBob fighting game. It also holds the distinction of being a game I've reviewed 3 times now, once as Dark Lucy. But let's do a quick overview. In a format similar to Punch-Out, you play as SpongeBob and have to fight through Patrick, Sandy, and Squidward. I guess we could call it Sponge-Out. You can punch or kick right or left, but you can also use a special move when the meter that slowly fills in the corner is full. Then SpongeBob throws Gary at the enemy. Gosh, what was with Sarbachan and making games where you throw Gary? You can play either newbie mode or champ mode, and they're both a little difficult. You just have to be quick with hitting the buttons. Kicking is far more efficient than punching, and Squidward is an absolute monster that will utterly destroy you. The key is to avoid letting your enemies get a hit in because they will not stop hitting you once they get their way. Also time your special move properly because it can easily disrupt your momentum if you've got a good button mash going. It's a good game and it can give you a reasonable challenge, but let's hope that's the last time I ever have to analyze it. Let's keep the Sarbachan train going. This is Anchovy Assault. Don't worry, they aren't real anchovies. Imagine a SpongeBob game where it's the plot of Help Wanted, but instead of feeding the anchovies, he comes out and just starts slaughtering them. You know, I'm sure in the grand scope of the internet, someone's made something to that effect at least once or twice. But basically, Plankton is sending robot anchovies at you. Wait, anchovies? I thought anchovies in SpongeBob looked like this. Anyway, you choose to play as either SpongeBob, Squidward, or Mr. Krabs. Then you smash the spacebar with reckless abandon to fling them. Then you have to hit the spacebar when a cursor lands in the center of a meter so you can throw stuff at them. This keeps them flying. There are 2 modes, free play and contest mode. In free play, you can just send them flying for fun. In contest, you have to accomplish tasks, such as sending them flying a certain distance. You also have limited ammunition, so you have to be wary of how much you're throwing. I like watching the characters at the side of the screen too. Look at Squidward's face here. Not much else to it. Pretty much what it says it is. So now let's look back at the Nick Arcade. During this time period, a massive collaboration was happening that was hard to miss if you were watching Nickelodeon and seeing the constant commercials for it. Diner Dash was a massive series of restaurant simulators that took the world by storm when it came out. The first game was considered one of the most downloaded games at the time. Its publisher, Play First, collaborated with Nickelodeon to make a SpongeBob version of it. The plot revolves around Mr. Krabs wanting to expand the Krusty Krab to make more money. In the game, you would drag customers to a table and wait for them to order something. Then you'd get food for them. You can't let customers get too angry by ignoring them for too long, and each type of customer has its own set of rules that you have to abide by if you want to serve them correctly. Bubble Bass is the VIP customer, so it's of the absolute necessity to appease him. But you extend your empire and play through different restaurants, and you eventually have to please King Neptune himself. In his design from the movie, nonetheless. But it all ends up being a dream in the end. Don't you just hate endings like that? It's really easy to get into this, but it's an extremely fast-paced game that can induce some high levels of stress. I wouldn't recommend it for those who are easily overwhelmed. Kinda like me. The SpongeBob Diner Dash series would continue to expand as years went by, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're still in 2006. So let's finish up by looking at the other 3 games Sarbakan released this year, starting with Bikini Bottom Carnival, which came out on July 20th. They handled it a little strangely because they released it in 3 different parts that were all the same game with more areas unlocked in each part. Not sure why they didn't just update the existing game. If you want them all, you could just play the 3rd. They're all simple carnival games, but some can be really fun. It's also 2-player, and you can choose either SpongeBob or Patrick. In my opinion, some of the best games include this one where you drive around and catch stars. You can even electrocute your opponent in 2-player mode, as well as this one where you shoot people. Only bad people though. That's right, SpongeBob has the ultimate determination of your morality. There are a few games where you hit certain keyboard keys as quickly as possible too. I tend to be good at those. I will never stop thanking the SpongeBob typing game for my typing skills. There are also a few button mashing ones, so I guess this was the button mash era of Sarbakan. But this is a pretty easy compilation of games that can kill a good amount of time. I recommend it. And then came SpongeBob SquarePants on August 27th. I guess it can be considered an early winter special. The gameplay is actually kinda hard to explain. You're fighting a current that's moving you to the right, but you have to roll this snowball. You have to build a snowman in each level, which bears the same shape as one of your friends. The snow slowly goes away as you use more of it, but snowballs will rain down and cover more space, so you don't have to worry about running out too much. Though you have to avoid enemies like Plankton, who burns the snow with a flamethrower. Now, Plankton with a flamethrower is one scary thing to think about. But mostly, this game is just a peaceful thing you can play to watch snow slowly disappear as you roll it up. It can take a while to clear a few stages, but it's a fair way to spend your time. But now let's conclude the year with an especially popular one. A kinda spooky one, too. I think it'll make for an appropriate conclusion. Full disclosure, this isn't a game I recommend if you value your fingers. I did say this was Sarbakan's button mashing era. This is Shippo Ghouls. Is it just me, or should there really be something in this big space right here? We also have some spooky music to set the vibe. According to this, we're going against the Unsinking Dutchman. That's one heck of a nickname. Apparently you're in the wreck of the Flying Dutchman's ship and it's floating to the surface of the ocean. So like a reverse shipwreck. That's kinda clever because it's underwater. You have to get out before the water drains. And I don't know why, but I laughed way too hard at "this guy gives you an extra life." I know extra lives are sometimes called guys, but I definitely read it with the wrong inflection. Imagine it's just some guy giving you an extra life. So you can play on either easy, medium, or R mode. They aren't especially different, but you get higher scores for the more difficult ones. You have to run through the ship and squeeze through pipes by demolishing your finger to press the down button repeatedly. You can't jump, so just ignore platforms you can't get to. Now I'm normally halfway decent at button mashers, but even I struggled with this one a little. You have to really mash to get yourself moving. There are also jump scares like the Flying Dutchman and bats that'll jump out at you. And there's this skeleton that'll close its ribcage on you, so you have to wiggle out with the arrow keys. But you can get past these monsters if you find a jack-o'-lantern to wear as a mask. But it'll break if you try to go down a pipe with it. A better power-up is the Sea Slug, which will make you all slippery so you don't have to button mash. There are also Krabby Patties you can grab for bonus points. You keep going down for a couple levels, then you win the game. I hope there's water in that barrel there. But there's still a bit more to see. You can put in a few codes to unlock some game-changing features. If you type in sun, the Krabby Patties will turn into waffles. Or pancakes, one of those two things. POW will unlock a bonus stage at the very end. You just collect all these bonuses here. Find turns the water red, so I guess we're in the Iron Lung Ocean now. And Reset undoes all of your active cheats. Or it does that. Lastly, if you click on this candy icon that occasionally appears, you get a jump scare. Not that scary. But this is fun enough. I found myself going back to it a few times. But be sure to rest your finger afterwards because it will be extremely sore. And that brings us to the end of 2006. From this point onward, SpongeBob Flash games would further take off. There were so many SpongeBob Flash games coming out in 2007 and 2008 that it could almost be considered a golden age. Sarbakan continued to put out classics, games to advertise certain episodes kept coming out, and some of the most memorable additions to Nick.com came to be, including some that are especially hard to find these days. Nevertheless, I plan to keep going through these eras and showing the best these SpongeBob SquarePants developers had to offer. I hope you'll stick around for the ride and enjoy reliving these as much as I do. Thank you for joining me. I will see you in the next memory.